Welcome to the Kentucky Atheist.
Ain't no motherfucker in this world can do it like me. Open up your eyes and insert a little rising. You don't have to love me, you don't have to like me. Got enough love in myself, in my psyche. You should have the same in your brain nightly. If you wanna taste me, you can fucking try me. If you wanna hate, you know where to find me. And if you're going atheist, you can fucking bite me. I'll be cruising in my lane fast, call it high speed. I've been working hard, yeah, I've been working nightly. If you think you'll win, ha, nah, likely. I be taking shots, yeah, cold-blooded, icy. Watching numbers grow is what I call sightseeing. In the front row, run it up when they hype me. The following grows, they know how to ignite me. Call me CEO, I've been running right, see. And I ain't playing games.
Hey guys, my name's Joe. I'm the Kentucky Atheist. Today I'm here with Dave from the Captive Desk. We're going to take a look at a video put out by AIG, a bunch of silly claims made by a young earth creationist. I think it's important to correct these things though. AIG is constantly pushing homeschooling material into kids and drawing people into their ARC theme park so that they can put them in an auditorium and indoctrinate them with things like the earth is 6,000 years old and evolution isn't true. And me and Dave are going to take a look at some of those claims today and you know, give our thoughts on it. Purely commentary on a video released by AIG. AIG and the original video is linked in the description if you want to go look at it. We may not make it through the whole video in one single sitting, but we're going to try. Otherwise, though, I want to say thank you to everybody that's coming to watch us, and I really appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe if you like what you see here. If you don't, give me a thumbs down. Let me know. We also have memberships and Patreon and all that stuff available, and all those links are in the description as well, along with a link to Dave's channel. How you doing today, Dave?
Doing good, Joe. How you doing?
I'm doing good. So the video we're looking at is Kevin Hadsell making a bunch of claims about young earth creationism and the flood and geology and completely screwing everything up. This isn't the funnest guy to watch, but he makes a lot of claims here, and AIG is a really big force in the young earth creationist movement, so worth taking a look at.
Are we going to start with the supposed authority of man's word, man's ideas, man who claims that such and such happened 65, 66 million years ago, but wasn't there to observe it? Or are we going to start with the authority of the word of God? That is what this comes down to. I want to start off this presentation by sharing a quote from a humanist that I debated online several years ago. And he said this: "Let us address the first point, that the fossil timeline and rock strata that we see are the result of a global flood as described in Genesis. The initial and rather obvious challenge of that assertion would be that the flood was very organized in its deposition of its victims. Furthermore, we can challenge the idea of a global flood quite easily. For starters, we know that there's not enough water on Earth to completely cover its surface. Now we can hand wave that by saying that God could make as much water as he saw fit. Now, some of you might not completely understand these comments, and that's okay. I'm going to show you at the end of the presentation how I responded to RC on these points. I'm just abbreviating his name for privacy. And with that said, I can't assume that everyone in this room necessarily familiar with the scriptural account of the flood, so I'm going to take a few minutes and read some select scriptures about the flood. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. The thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens."
Yeah. So the stuff he said before the video started, he says that later. So we'll definitely address that when he gets there. But
yeah, I was going to say, yeah, the thing with I had a debate, but it's a secret.
Yeah.
You know, why doesn't he say, hey, go check out our debate? You know, it's on, you know, a channel or a podcast or something, but it's just, I'm just giving the initials so that we can keep it, you know, private or something. It's like,
yeah,
I'm suspect that
he,
yeah, I don't think he really actually had a debate. I think he just, you know, engages in comments with people.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just somebody commented and he feels like he had a gotcha in the comments, so he's going to talk about it. I love that he chose this verse though, because the most important line in this that I see on the screen is the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and he grieved him to his heart. Um, that right there is one of the lines that I think shows the contradiction in the God that they believe in. Because how can an all-powerful, all-knowing being feel grief and regret? You wouldn't be able to regret things because you already know what's going to happen and have the choice to do otherwise.
It's all
So
part of the plan.
yeah, so I think it's funny that he left that out because it's a big problem for his whole narrative, actually, for the existence of his God. But goes on to talk about man, killing everything in the flood. Which let's think about what that actually says. He says, "I'm going to blot out man," and he regrets making man. What they're talking about here is no less than the destruction of all of mankind. Men, women, children, innocent babies, animals of all sorts, because some people were wicked and God was unable to do anything else about it.
And it's an odd way to do it because, first of all, obviously, he restarts with all the same things. Same people, same animals, same plants. And if it was just to punish the people, why get rid of the plants and animals if you're just going to start all over again with the same plants and animals? It just there's so many rabbit holes. It just you can go all day. It's just nonsense. And besides the fact that Geology 101, go to any geology site anywhere, the Earth has not been underwater for 3.5 billion years.
Yeah.
Ever since land first poked out, it hasn't been underwater. So they're against all of geology. Of course, they have Andrew Snelling, who'll just make up whatever he wants as their house geologist. So yeah.
Just make it up as he goes. All right,
I never use the argument there's not enough water. I use the argument that we have core samples from around the globe that show different environments, not one environment, not anywhere. It just doesn't happen.
This whole AIG and creation and the Bible being literal thing, I mean, it's another one of those things that, okay, it sounds like a nice story, but then whenever you look into it, to compare it to history or science or geology or cosmology, it falls apart instantly because none of it's actually true. It's just a story. But there's a whole multi-million-dollar company now that is making millions every year by telling people this story is true.
And what they leave out is that they set it up as there's either our creation myth or there's science. They completely leave out all the other creation myths that are out there.
Yeah. They teach it as absolute truth, and it's a horrible thing to see. And really, I think again, it's important to say that they make millions of dollars by telling people this is true, when this does not comport with reality in any way. That needs to be said over and over and over about these people, that they're just incentivized to make money. They know that they're lying to people and they're harming children in the process of doing it.
I just got the annual or semi-annual, monthly, whatever he calls it, the Dan Phelps email, and he got a hold of some IRS filings.
Oh.
And it says they claim the Ark and associated buildings are worth more than $119 million, yet they only pay taxes on a value of $48 million. Ken Ham is making in excess of $250,000 a year in salary plus perks, and a lot of his family members are on the salary as well. They have their shell companies, which is called the Parking Lot Ventures, because the parking lot money goes somewhere else into this other company.
Yeah.
And yet they spend $1 million a year on transportation costs, even though he's a co-owner in a private jet.
Yeah. Of course he does.
And
They all do
what
that,
else?
don't they?
The money they make seems to be from contributions, not profit. And their biggest losing venture is their school.
Well, I agree.
That's the latest. And yeah, and there's some forms, some tax forms there that he got. So yeah, Dan Phelps is always snooping around on Ken Ham and trying to keep him honest. But obviously, it's another thing where they have all these companies. They sold the land that they own to their school for $1. So that every time you hear that,
$10.
something's going on. That's how do you sell your own property to yourself, right? It's
They
always
did that so he did that so it would be part of the nonprofit company. But all right, moving on.
The earth was filled with violence, and that's why God said, "Behold, I will destroy them with the earth." So God told Noah to build the ark. Its length 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, its height 30 cubits. And so this was a massive ship. Based on the likely size of a cubit during this time period, the Ark Encounter replica.
It's not a replica, first of all. For it to be a replica, the Ark would have had to actually exist, and it's just Ken Ham's fantasy world put that he had enough money to build, and then he lies to people and says it's true. It's not a replica of any boat. It wouldn't be seaworthy if they put it in water. It's a building with a boat on the front of it.
Whenever pressed, he invokes artistic licensing.
Yeah.
That means, the way he sees it.
It means his fantasy land. All right.
Has a ship at 510 feet long, 85 feet wide, and 51 feet high.
That's a huge bitch.
But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. And the New Testament affirms that it was just...
So what they're telling us here is that God's going to kill everyone and everything, but Noah and his family, the 8 of them, are going to go on the ark, and they're going to restart all of the life on earth from 2 animals, and all of the people on earth are all descendants of these 8 people. Something that we know is impossible. So, and very much not true.
Just 8 persons that were brought safely through the water. We read that all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. Rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. So this is an additional 150 days, right? A lot of people tend to think the earth or the flood was only 40 days and 40 nights. Oh no, it was a lot longer than that. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated. This is another.
All right. Another wonderful verse from our book of all knowing everything. So he talks about the fountains of the great deep. What are those? Where are they? Windows of heaven. What are those? Where are they? If you are accepting those things as metaphor and not the rest of this, why? I mean, those are the problems on the surface of it. But, I mean, think about what they're actually saying here. God was mad because there were some bad people. So he killed every living thing on earth except for Noah's family and had him put a bunch of animals in a boat. I have questions. Why would God need to preserve 2 of every animal if he's the creator and the all-powerful person that can make them? He could just put more animals. Why did God have to kill everyone when he could just make people strike them dead on the spot? Like, why is all this necessary? And then God feels bad about it afterwards. I mean, it's obviously a mythological story, right? I mean,
almost like a terrible flood happened, where a
Yeah.
lot of people and animals and homes were all washed away. And that story was retold, and it was added on that, yeah, it was everybody. It was the whole world, man. You know, it wasn't just here. And granted, if your world is flooded and your loved ones and your animals and your home is all gone, that is your whole world. I mean, your whole world is gone.
150 days. And so this leads to a lot of common questions like, how did the flood happen? What evidence did the flood leave behind? Doesn't it take millions of years to form rock layers? Don't fossils form slowly and gradually? What about the order in the fossil record? And why does...
Now, let's see if he answers these questions. I want everybody to be able to see the questions up there for a minute. And as he talks, let's see if he answers these questions.
Does it matter? These are the questions that we're going to answer in this presentation. This is roughly the outline of today's presentation. But first, we're going to sneak this question in here. When did the global flood occur? We're going to answer this one first.
But we have civilizations that are older than that. They didn't experience a global flood. So.
Yeah.
Consider Genesis chapter 1. God created Adam and Eve on day 6 of creation week. So we know how old the earth and the heavens are at that point. But then we can look at the genealogies of Genesis chapters 5 and 11. So-and-so begot so-and-so at such and such age. And we can count.
All right. So-and-so did begot so-and-so. Yeah.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, like, he says he's going to answer these questions, but instead he tells us what the Bible says, and he quotes it verse by verse. Like, telling us what the Bible says doesn't answer these questions, because the Bible is not a historical source. It's not considered so by anybody. It shouldn't be considered so by anybody. It's a book of religion and theology. It's not a historical source. It's not a history book. Why is he telling us what the Bible says? Go ahead, Dave.
And even if you take what the Bible says, the genealogies are not to date the earth. The genealogies are to set for the bloodline for the king or for the Messiah, however you want to interpret it. And a lot of these ages where they say they lived, 900 years, some of the understanding is that these are the family lines. These aren't individual people. So take it what it is in the Bible, they're completely misusing why it's in the Bible.
Yeah. And this is another case of, you need to explain to me what things you're taking literally, what things you're taking figuratively, who decides which and why. That would be an important question for what he's putting forward here. But we'll let him continue on to tell us what the Bible says.
Calculate that from Adam to Abraham is about 2,000 years. And we can piece some other things together in the Bible and find that from Abraham to today is about 4,000 years. That's how we get about 6,000 years for the age of the earth. But regarding the timing of the flood, we really need to look at the timing of Noah. And looking at the timing of Noah, we can see that the flood was about 4,400 years ago. And so as we look at the seven...
So what he did there was...
I was close.
Yeah. You never know. He took and he looked at the names in the Bible, which all it says is this one begot this one, and then they may be mentioned in stories later. And they made a timeline out of that, which absolutely is not in the Bible, and the Bible does not say. And then he went ahead and said, well, since this timeline's true, that means the flood happened about 4,400 years ago during the time of Noah. And it's just based on bullshit after bullshit. He has built a mountain of bullshit to get to this chart.
And what he's basing a lot of this, this is Ken Ham's theology. All right. And Ken Ham was told by Walter Kaiser, who's a expert in ancient Hebrew and Judaism and everything and stuff. He told Ken Ham right to his face, you don't understand ancient Hebrew. Okay. Ken Ham takes his interpretations, first of all, from English. As far as I know, he never bothered to learn Hebrew or Greek or anything else. And then this little chart here, this is also a Ken Ham creation. This is not out of the Bible. This is something, again, Ken Ham makes up his own theology. And everybody that works for Ken Ham works under a statement of faith that says they have to follow what Ken Ham says and say what Ken Ham says, or they don't work there anymore.
Yeah.
7 C's of history. The first 4 C's of history being the roadmap through Genesis 1 through 11, creation, the fall, the flood, the Tower of Babel. The last 3 C's of history being about the person and work of Christ. We're going to talk. So
he's telling us the history according to the Bible, not the history according to reality. He's saying that what the Bible says is history is true, and he's basing all this off that. So it's
a lot about those first 3 C's of history as well as the last 3 C's of history at the end. But I just want to point out creation about 6,000 years ago, catastrophe being the flood, that's about 4,400 years ago. And let's consider that 3rd C of history for a moment. If there really was this global catastrophic flood where the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains and the whole heaven were covered, then wouldn't we expect to find billions of dead things buried in rock layers, laid down by water all over the earth? And that is exactly what we find in the flood.
It is exactly what we find, but it's not the result of a flood. We find all these things laid down, but they're not hydrologically sorted, which they would have to be if what he's saying is true. We find these fossils laid down in the order from the time they existed throughout the layers. We can actually identify the layers by what fossils we find in them, because we know they're laid down in the order that they existed and went extinct. You can't find an animal that went extinct in a higher layer, and you don't find modern things in the lower levels. It's not at all hydrologically sorted, and there's all kinds, literal mountains of evidence that these layers get laid down over millions of years, and it's this is one of those things. Like, I don't know how grown, educated people go on stage and say stuff like this, because it's just silly. Pretending like archaeology agrees with him, because it doesn't.
Dr. Joel was covering that there's actually a mountain of fossils underneath Ken Ham's Ark Park, and that it would be great if he, just dug a trench, that you could walk through and just see the walls of fossils on each side of you. Of course, then you would see all the changes in the layers and the fossils.
Yeah.
But apparently Ken Ham sells bags of dirt for $10 up to $50 or something. And he sticks little fossils in these bags of dirt so the kids can go clean out the bag of dirt and find a couple fossils, which, it's entertainment for the kids and everything. But this is not in any way educational or anything. And he has, you live there, fossils everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So, but he doesn't want people to see those fossils. He wants the petrified wood pieces and other things he buys, by the gross online somewhere, that they put in these bags of dirt. That's what all he wants you to go home with.
Fossil record. So where the evolutionists interpret the rock layers and fossils being laid down slowly and gradually over millions of years, the creation scientists interpret that most of these layers are laid down in just 1 year during the global flood. And that pulls the rug right out from underneath the whole millions of years concept, doesn't it?
Nope.
Yeah, if you assume it's true.
There's so many lines of evidence that everything did not go extinct 4,000 years ago, including civilizations like the Aborigines that have been in Australia for like 50,000 years. Okay.
Yeah.
They didn't notice. Okay.
He does something sneaky here, because he talks about what actual geologists and scientists find when they study the rocks on the earth. And then he adds in the flood stuff and says, creation scientists say this, and it pulls the rug out from under it. But the thing is, these two things were never on equal ground to begin with. They're, scientists have taken the scientific method and applied it to the rocks around us and looked at them and came up with dates through different all different methods of coming to the dates of the ages of these rocks.
Well, even before they had modern dating methods, just the way the layers were laid down and adding up the deposition and how long it would take seas to come and go, forests to come and go, deserts to come and go, all the different environments, they concluded that, you know, it had to be at least, I think they guessed, millions of years old, just because of, you know, that's what they always leave out, is that one layer will be a forest, above it is a desert, above it is an ocean. You know, these things completely changed, and you have to have long ages just to have the forests, you know, have generations, have the marine life have generations, and they all lay down all these fossils. So but they can ignore all the modern dating methods. And prior to that, the geologists or naturalists, whatever they called themselves at the time, they were the first geologists. Basically, they realized just looking at the layers, they had to be at least millions of years old because of all the different environments and the deposition time.
Yeah, I think the thing he does though is he compares creation science to actual science, and the problem with that is that actual science relies on the scientific method and observations, testing and things to come to conclusions, whether it's radiometric testing or whatever. But they go through the scientific method to come to these conclusions. Creation scientists start with the conclusion that what the Bible said is true, and then they try to find ways to apply that to the world around us. It's pure post hoc rationalization. He says that this pulls the rug out from under scientists, but it's only because he's assuming that what he's saying is true. And there's nothing to support that other than my book says a thing.
And not to just pick on this one, but like we mentioned earlier, there's lots of creation myths, and almost all the creation myths, science refutes them too. So, I mean, any of them that say, you know, this came and then that came, they don't, you know, they could have guessed and they could have written stories and everything, but none of them are accurate to what science says.
There's this common misconception, though, that the battle between creation versus evolution is about different evidences. Like, here's evidence for evolution, and here's evidence for creation, and the battle is who has more evidence or who has...
All right. You want to go first on that one?
They don't have any evidence. No. That's the problem. And this is something that Ken Ham and a lot of creationists have turned their phrasing a little bit over the years, because their argument always thrown back at them was, we have science, you just have a religion. So what they've done in the recent years is say, no, you have a religion too. Everything's a religion. All science is a religion. If you like chocolate ice cream, it's a religion. You know, if you sleep with the fan on, it's a religion, right? Everything's a religion, to take away that argument. But it also, for one thing, it leaves everything being a religion makes it meaningless, right? It's like saying everything is blue.
Muddy in the water is all he's doing.
Yeah, if everything is blue, then there's no distinguishing anything. You know, everything's blue. What's the sky? Blue. The grass? Blue. The trees? Blue. Blue, 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 blue. Yeah. And as far as his claims of creation science, no, it's not. It's nobody in academia accepts creationism in science. It's not in academia. It's not in any textbooks. It's not in any classrooms outside of a religious school or some kind of religious classes. It is not accepted by any field of science, nowhere. And it doesn't matter where you go around the globe. It's not just a conspiracy here in America to, you know, keep Ken Ham quiet or some nonsense. This is globally. People have never heard of Ken Ham. If they did hear of him, they would say none of his stuff is science.
Yeah, no, I agree.
The more convincing evidence. But that's not the case at all. The real battle is actually over the same evidence. See, creation scientists and evolutionary scientists are looking at the same rock layers, the same fossils, the same stars in space, and all that evidence exists in the...
Yes, We're looking at the same thing. The difference is that science looks at it and wants to understand how it got there, how long it's been there, how it formed, and understand all the different things about it. Creationists don't want that. Creationists want to look at the same thing and say, how does this fit into my narrative? And he's pointing that out right here. He's saying the quiet part out loud right now, is that
ask any of these creationists, where are your labs at?
Yeah, they literally, this is their process. Okay, the Bible is true. Science says that it takes millions of years for these rocks to form, but the Bible's true, and it says I got 6,000 years, so we're going to explain it like this, and that's what they do. And it's nothing to do with science at all. 100% pseudoscience, lies, bullshit. That's what AIG tells people. It is. If you're out there and you're thinking, hey, maybe this guy's got a point, go read any scientific paper, any paper about these subjects. And you'll find that what he's telling you is absolutely a lie.
And if you get curious and go look through their own stuff, they will contradict themselves in their own literature, because they don't even try to keep their stories straight. There's been a lot of creators out there and articles out there and stuff that shows their own stuff contradicts itself. The ages, the generations, all the years and everything, they just make it up on the fly. Right. They do not have this set in stone or anything else. And if you go from one to another, they don't agree.
Right.
You go to the Hawaiian shirt guy, he doesn't agree. You go to Discovery Institute, they don't agree. So as you float around, all their stories are different. None of them align with each other.
Right. Well, it's because, and this is a result of the post hoc rationalization, because it's never their goal to actually explain the evidence they're looking at. That they're not trying to explain the evidence. They're trying to make the evidence fit the narrative. And so whatever they have to say in whatever interview is what they say. Whatever way they can rationalize saying, no, it happened this way, they take that route. And it's never supported by anything. It's always just made up, just like the Bible is.
The present. And then the scientists make interpretations of that evidence when coming up with ideas about the past. But those ideas about the past are going to be governed by what they already believe about the past.
Wrong. Again, the first naturalists, geologists, your early scientists, generally a lot of them were religious, and a lot of them had religious funding because the religions had the money to do stuff. So if some guy wanted to get on a boat and go somewhere and go look at some, he might have got some church money to go do it. And they came to conclusions, as we said earlier. If you look at the layers and the different environments in them and everything, they came to a conclusion of long ages. These are religious people that genuinely did some science and came to a conclusion.
Well, what he says, though, is a complete lie. He says that people came to ideas about the past, and then they apply those ideas to what they find in the fossil record. And again, that's not how any of this works. That's projection completely, because scientists do not do that. They base all conclusions are based on observation and evidence. Now, does science sometimes get things wrong or have to refine it and come up with a better answer? All the fucking time. But scientists do not say, well, we think the past was like that, so that explains this. They don't do it like that. They study it and they make actual observations and actual evidence, which is the opposite of what creation scientists do. He just straight out lied about the scientific process there.
Whether that be cosmological, geological, biological evolution, or whether that be the creation account, the Genesis account. And so it is critically important to understand the difference between observational science and historical science. Let's take a canyon.
There isn't any. Yeah. This is something Ken Ham makes up. This is something also a lot of creationists do, and it irritates me over and over. The observational part means to them that you have to see it with your eye. No. Yeah. We know about lots of things, first of all, that you cannot see with the naked eye. You need a microscope or a telescope, or you need theory No.
Well, let me
And
just
you
ask a
can
question.
also observe data. That is
If-
part. You can observe data. You don't have to observe the event. You can observe the data from the event.
If we go and let's say Antarctica, and we dig up a big ice core from Antarctica, and we know that all the layers that we see in the ice core are formed from snow event after snow event. I'm not even going to say seasons, even though that's truly what it is. It marks the seasons. But let's just say big snow after big snow. You have hundreds of thousands of layers of that. So you have a way to date how far back, even if you're not exact. But if we find a fossil down in the bottom of that ice core and we look at where it's at compared to the layers and we know the age of the ice core, then we can determine the age of that fossil within it. And that's through observation. It's not, we didn't have to be there to watch each layer to form. And him and his ilk depend on this sort of narrative in order to tell their lies about science. This is how they do it. They act like science and creationists are on the same page and everything, and that science just assumes these things. And when that's truly what they're doing, in fact, they're not even assuming things. They're looking at it and trying to fit God in every gap they can squeeze God into. And it's a fancy God of the gaps argument is all he's doing here.
And don't forget Ken Ham's catchphrase, "Were you there?"
Yeah,
and that's what he tells the children.
Which makes no fucking sense. Like,
yeah, he tells the children to ask the scientists, "Were you there?"
I mean, even on simple things like a flood event, we can look at the marks on the flood walls and on the buildings and everything and see how high the flood waters were. We didn't have to actually see them there to know that, though. We have evidence that that's the case, and we observe it. That's the observation part that he's lying about. He just a complete misrepresentation of what science is.
And for example, Grand Canyon, or a portion of it, we can say measure the height of that canyon. Both an evolutionary scientist and creation scientist can do that and agree. They can observe the grain structure and agree on what's observed there. They can agree on the type of rock layer, say sedimentary rock. All of that is observable, testable, repeatable. That's observational science.
He finally got
some of
something
it.
right. Yeah.
Yes, he leaves things out, but yeah, that part was right. Yeah.
We can look at the height and the objective facts to do with the Grand Canyon and agree that the Grand Canyon exists. Now, the thing is we try to, through science, explain why it exists based on historical evidence and historical events supported by facts and evidence. And we use scientific reasoning to get to that. Again, they do the opposite. They look at these and see the same canyon, the same size, and they say, how can we make it to where God did that in a flood event 4,000 years ago? We have to figure out a way to explain it. And that's where the problem is. That's where all this goes wrong, because it's all based on the assumption that that stuff's true, and it absolutely is not. We have a lot of things in science that we'll say, well, that's not really supported by the evidence, or we're not sure that's the right conclusion because we have mixed evidence or whatever. But it's always based on evidence. It's not ever just based on, because I know it's this way. What creationists attempt to do is make it seem like it's a perfectly acceptable thing to go and look at it and say, well, we know that the flood happened 4,400 years ago, so how fast did these layers have to be laid down? That's the answer. It's not a math problem. It's science. You have to observe it and look at it and see what you find in those rocks, and you can determine the age of them a number of ways. But trying to fit them into a Bible story is not one of them.
And I'll give him some observational science to do. Go look at where the Colorado River ends. It's silt. There's no debris field. Okay, there's no huge boulders.
Yeah.
It wasn't all washed away in one big mess, or there would be a debris field and large rocks. There aren't.
It's almost like it eroded over time, huh?
Very slowly, and it's all silt. You can look at satellite imagery of it.
Yeah.
And the other thing not happening all at once, the Colorado does 360s. It meanders all over and it turns back on itself and then goes back again, okay? That doesn't happen in a catastrophic event. You would have one straight shot channel where everything just got blasted out of the way, right?
Yeah.
So show me some observational evidence of a debris field and or how this, huge event decided to just casually meander and come back this way for a little while and then go over this way. And again, you can show satellite imagery of all the ancient, tributaries that came off too. It's all meandering. There's no straight shot anywhere. Show it to me. What was his name? Matt? Isn't that who we're talking about? I'm sorry, this guy's new. Kevin. My fault. Kevin, show me some observational evidence of a debris field.
Yeah.
Just one thing. Show me a debris field.
I think he's referring to the stuff done by Steve Austin, who is a pseudo-geologist that works for AIG and other creationists.
Fraud.
He's up there with Ron Wyatt. Yeah. All right, let's see.
But historical science deals with something different here, because take for example the age of that rock. The scientists weren't there to directly observe the rock form or even how it was deposited, how the sediment layers were deposited. They weren't directly there to observe it. And so that's why we call it historical science, because it's...
I mean, why does that matter? You weren't there to directly observe it either, but you're going to tell me it happened 4,000 years ago because of a book that isn't trusted to be a source for anything historical. So how does that put your story on better grounding than the one that has been concluded from evidence and observation? We don't have to be there at the time to observe that exact rock. We know how long it takes those rocks to form. We know the process that they go through to become rock. Gutsick Gibbon does an excellent video about the mud problem, where she explains how long it takes these layers to actually form once they're like a muddy mess and ready to be a layer. She does an excellent job explaining how this would happen, and we know how those processes work. So is it more likely that your book that was written by primitives thousands of years ago has an accurate account of geology, or is it more likely that the geologists who have studied how these rocks form and studied them in every way possible might be right that it takes longer than 6,000 years to do this? And you have no ground to stand on, buddy.
And then to get better and better answers, they developed ways to test it with radiometric dating, radioactive decay rates. And I will point out that creationists will accept dating methods when it's a biblical artifact.
Yeah.
But any other dating done, that doesn't work. So this is another problem they have, where they will say, oh, look, this, scroll they found or whatever is from, first century or whatever it is. They'll accept the dating methods, no problem.
Yeah.
When they can get within, they're so accurate now, they're getting within decimal places in accuracy on these dating methods. And that,
really
that's
good
just,
and
that's too accurate.
Carbon dating is not the only form of dating, folks. But I tell you what, since I mentioned Erica's video, I'll link that in the description for anybody that wants to go watch it, about the mud problem, where she completely destroys any chance of there being a flood.
And you can't bend mud.
Yeah.
I don't know if he mentions it in this video or not, but
I
they
think
often
he does
mention
say something, but he brushes right past it.
Yeah, the bent layers or something. Try to bend some mud. Make up a bucket of soupy mud that's been under a mile of water or whatever, right? Supposedly, make some nice soupy mud.
Yeah, just show me a layer that goes like this that you
and
made
bend it.
in a year.
Yeah, bend that soupy mud. I want to see somebody bend that mud.
not observable, it's not testable, it's not repeatable in the way that observational science is. And so you might wonder, well, how do we know anything about the past? How do we know, for example, that George Washington lived? Well, I mean, certainly you can go to George Washington's grave and maybe do a little bit of observational science, but it's mostly historical. How do we know about?
What are you talking about? If we go to his tomb, it's not observational. We can find him.
Where's Moses' grave? Yeah, where's
Yeah.
Moses' grave? Let's verify that. We want to see the grave. Where are all the people in the Bible? Where are they buried?
If they say they know where Moses is buried, let's go dig his ass up. And
I want to
prove that
observe
he
it.
was who you say he was. Yeah.
I want to observe it.
we have tons of physical evidence that George Washington existed. I can't believe he used that as an example. We have loft painted pictures of him that people did right there with him in the room. You know, we have all kinds of things. We have all kinds of artifacts and stuff left over from his presidency.
George Washington, it's because of reliable eyewitness accounts, reliable historical records of George Washington's life and the things that he accomplished. It's a similar situation when it comes.
No.
That's false equivalent.
Let's tell a story about George Washington and when he chopped down the cherry tree. That never happened. So there you go. If you were using the George Washington Bible that said he cut down the cherry tree, you'd be up there telling people right now it's an established fact that he said, I cannot tell a lie, I didn't do it, whatever, he cut down the cherry tree. No, it never happened.
Comparing events that took place over millions of years in a layer of rock is in no way similar to telling about the events that people observed a person do throughout the course of their life. And again, if that's the standard of evidence that he wants to use, though, it's worse than that for him, though, because he doesn't even have that. You know, he's the one making the absurd claim that goes against everything we observe here. And he is bitching about we don't have this and science doesn't do that and all of his historical versus observational science bullshit. He's making up all this stuff, but the fact of it is that if we reversed it and asked him to provide any of that for his claims, he doesn't have that either. That's what he's trying to build out of this here. And it's just done in such a ridiculous way. There is no comparison between the life of one human in the 1700s and rock that formed over millions of years. It's not the same thing. But you're absolutely right, Dave. Like, he says that it's reliable because somebody saw it with their eyes and recorded it. But he didn't chop down that tree. So should we just believe he did because it was written by a person that was alive at the time?
Or maybe he didn't exist because this one story's wrong. So maybe George Washington doesn't exist. He didn't cut down that cherry tree. What? That's what I was told. It's just nonsense. And
comes to the earth because we have a reliable eyewitness account about the creation of the earth and universe.
Who wrote it? Who wrote that eyewitness account? Just like, how does he even say that? He knows that's not true. The creation.
And when was it written? Genesis wasn't written first. It's not this antique story. Genesis supposedly was written during the Babylonian exile. Yes,
not by an eyewitness.
This is not the first story. That was left in a rock by God somewhere. No.
I don't know of any biblical scholar that would agree with him that the creation story was an eyewitness account written in the Bible. I don't know of a single person who would agree with him that that's true.
So, folks, here's the thing. It really comes down to authority. Are we going to start with the supposed authority of man's word, man's ideas, man who claims that such and such happened 65, 66 million years ago, but wasn't there to observe it? Man who is very fallible? Or are we going to start with the authority of the word of God, God who is holy?
What the hell?
He just said man is fallible. Man wrote the Bible. That means it can be wrong. He said it himself.
He tries to throw an appeal to authority there by saying the word of God, but the Bible doesn't say it's the word of God at all. First of all, it's the inspired word of God written by men. And if we get into who actually wrote the Bible, it was unknown men throughout history that, you know, were either paid or had a reason to write it the way that they wanted to write it. And we see that throughout the Bible. Like we know that's the case. Now, whenever we look at science, it's not just the authority of man. It's we've looked at these things and recorded the observations. We've recorded the facts, those things that comport with reality. We aren't trying to make it explain a narrative. We're trying to explain it as it is. And in doing that, you know, we've used science and evidence and reasoning and all those things. So it's not just man's word on something. It's another example of projection, because again, it's the Bible that is actually just written by people over thousands of years, passed down through generations, through translations and copies and various anonymous writers. So if that's the standard we're going to use, then the Bible shouldn't be used at all. But since it's its only source, I guess his other choice would be to go sit down somewhere.
And you don't dare question the Bible. You
Right.
absolutely should question science. Now, I'm not talking about these lay people that are denying science. I'm talking about if you actually get into it, you can do peer review. You can repeat tests. You can prove another scientist
If you
was
want to play
wrong.
by the rules, yeah. Yeah, if you want to
you-
play by the rules and
Yeah.
use the actual scientific method rather than post hoc rationalization, you can absolutely question anything in science, and it's made to be questioned. That's what peer review is. It's made to be questioned. It's made
Did
to
you
make
see-
you skeptical.
Righteous and just. God, who is the ultimate witness because he is the creator, and so he was there in the beginning, and he told us what happened through his word. That
Who observed that?
That is what this comes down to. And that leads to key philosophical differences when we compare geological evolution versus the Genesis account. So according to geological evolution, only natural processes can occur.
What are unnatural processes?
Yeah, he's
And
not
when,
going
when,
to give
when have
those.
we
Yeah.
seen that there's anything other than natural processes?
And
It's
it's
not
not-
that we limit it to that. That's all we observe.
Right. They're not doing a supernatural thing for the layers. They're saying that the flood made the layers, so that it's
Give
It's-
me any one reason
yeah.
why you would look at a rock and say, well, I'm going to need the supernatural explanation for that. Like, you're looking at physical things, so you look at physical processes. Like, it's not rocket science. It's just rock science.
this is poorly thought out. This is just not a
Yeah,
this
that's
is not a
stupid
good
thing to say.
yeah,
Yeah.
not a good
But the
slide
Genesis
there.
account gives testimony to the supernatural. Take, for example, the formation of dry land on day 3 of creation week.
My book says a thing.
How
Nobody
about
cares.
geological evolution? That philosophy claims that the present is the key to the past. It's called uniformitarianism. So when
And this is not how anybody states anything.
In
Well-
some things, yeah. In some things and other things, yeah. We don't. Science doesn't discount that catastrophes happen. It's wrong.
No, we observe what's actually there, and events in the past can be observed in the present. That's what he's calling uniformitarianism or whatever. The past is the key to explaining the present. Yes, of course, past events happened that led to other events that led to the present. That's how everybody looks at the timeline. Nobody does what you're saying here by looking at it and saying the future is the key to the past. That doesn't make sense, dumbass.
They're not even
we
looking.
typically
They're-
see sediment slowly
No.
accumulating, or we typically see continents slowly drifting, that we take those rates and extrapolate backwards and say that that's how it always was.
Nobody does that. That's not
Well,
how it
it's-
works.
and he's going to go to catastrophic plate tectonic movement, and you have a heat problem. It's called friction. Okay,
Yeah.
You try to
Yeah,
move
the
the planet around.
liquefaction of the rocks moving that fast is an immediate problem. I agree.
Yeah, it's
That's only one of the heat problems.
yeah. Now, some of these things, yeah, you have to take as, yes, if you rub a rock against another rock with enough pressure, you're going to cause a lot of friction.
Yes.
Period.
Yeah.
Go scoot your butt across the sidewalk.
We'll let him actually make the claim here.
But when we start with the Genesis account, we can consider a philosophy called catastrophism. When we consider the catastrophe of the global flood, that tells us that the past is the key to understand.
Why? Why would we do that? Again, every historian who has looked at the Bible says that it's not a historical source. It's not a scientific source. It's not a source for anything other than the Christian religion. And I guess parts of it could be blamed on Judaism and Islam as well. But it's only a religious text. Why would we look to Genesis for answers about rocks? You would never come to that conclusion if not indoctrinated by religion. You would never think, oh, I need to explain this with the Bible. It's a rock. Explain it with the way that rocks are created, which we understand very well. Your Bible story doesn't fit reality whatsoever, but the natural explanations that we have do. So even if there was nobody there to see it with their two eyes, we still know that the events of the past led to what we observe in the present. He's just wrong. He's just wrong and stupid.
2 Peter 3, they, referring to scoffers, will say, where is the promise of his coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all things are continuing as they were from the beginning of creation. So this philosophy of uniformitarianism, which basically says, hey, what we see now, that's how it's always been. Well, that's what we're reading here, right? It's denying the second coming of Christ, saying, hey, things are just going to continue as normal. But it's also implying that things just continue as normal, and you can extrapolate that backward.
Did he just quote mine the Bible? Is that what just happened?
Well, they're saying, I thought Jesus was coming back, and he didn't, because that's a Bible fail that Jesus told those people he was going to be back before all of them took their last breath. So they were legitimately saying, hey, he didn't come back.
Yeah, that's
not a good argument. If Jesus comes back, okay, but it doesn't change that he told some of those people that he was going to be back before they took their last breath. So he left them hanging. Now, if he fibbed to them or told them it wrong or whatever he did, it doesn't matter. They were convinced he would be back in their lifetime.
Yeah. That's what this was talking about. It wasn't talking about the history of uniformitarianism. It was talking about Jesus had told everybody that he would return before they took their last breath. He didn't. It's a failed prophecy.
He didn't. Yeah. Sorry.
That's what he's pointing to here, and he quote-mined it.
It's probably the biggest
narrative.
Yeah, it's probably the biggest Bible fail.
Denies the global flood, the catastrophe of the flood. And so 2 Peter 3 goes on to say, for they deliberately overlook this fact, that the heavens existed long ago, and the earth was formed out of water and through water by the word of God, and that by means of these, a world that then existed was deluded.
Yes, it says that.
The earth was not formed out of water. The earth was not formed out of water. No.
Well, I mean, Genesis tells this story of creation and the flood, and then in 2 Peter, they say they overlook this fact that Genesis tells the story of this flood. Again, it's using the Bible to support the Bible. It's not, he's just telling what the creation account is in Genesis. He's not sitting here and stating fact. This is based on the Bible. I don't know why he thought to include this.
I don't get
it.
With
water and perished. In other words, the Bible prophesied that people would deliberately overlook the fact that there was a global flood.
No.
And as a
No.
It's not being overlooked. There's absolutely no evidence of it whatsoever. None.
Yeah,
Zero.
That's the problem. We can't overlook all the evidence to the contrary. in order to agree with your book. That's what your problem is. We don't agree with you because we can't overlook the actual science and the scientists out there doing this work that show that what you're putting forth is absolutely not the case. That's what you're upset that we're not overlooking. Nobody's overlooking the worldwide flood. They're overlooking any reason to see that there was a worldwide flood, because there's nothing out there that supports that. Every bit of evidence leads us to an earth that is billions of years old and life existing over millions of years. So,
and people writing stories about it. Ken Ham likes to bring it up, and so do his speakers, that there's all these different stories about floods all around the world. And it's like, yeah, floods happen.
Yes.
Nobody's denying floods happen. And as I'm going to repeat again, it's probably a good idea to tell your kids or future generations, to say, hey, every once in a while it floods here. Okay.
See,
so be ready for it.
This is, it talks about God, the creator, in Genesis 1. And then whenever we get to the flood and stuff, it's talking about the power of God. And it's that thing that my parents always said is that I brought you onto this earth, I can take you off of it. And it's that kind of thing. It's just showing that God can kill everyone if you don't obey, and if you decide to have sex with angels, that it's bad.
Unbeliever, I did this, and even as a very short time as a believer, I did this. But we're not going to do this today. We're not going to overlook the fact that there was a global flood. In fact, the fact that there was a flood is going to be our starting point in this present.
That's your problem.
Yeah, there's the problem. We found it.
With zero evidence. Zero.
Yeah.
I mean, at least you can argue, well, did a Jesus exist or not exist, right? Okay. There's no argument. There was no global flood. No.
But what he essentially said here, and I love this because it goes back to the whole make-believe thing that I stole from R and Raw. But he says here, now we have all these scientists that have this evidence, and the scientists say that it shows us the earth is billions of years old and that these layers are laid down over millions of years. We have this, and here it is, you see it. But we've decided that we're going to start with that's not the case, that there was a flood. We're going to overlook all of that evidence. Meanwhile, while saying don't overlook the flood, and then he completely pivots to, no, we're not going to overlook it. We're going to say it's true. It's like, that's not a logical step. That's not, again, those two things are not the same. One of them is based on reality, reason, evidence, and science. And the other one is just you make believing whatever you want to believe. And then to say, well, this presentation is going to be my make-believe version of events. And it's like, really, man? And I can't believe he says a lot of the things he says, because to me, even when I was a believer, if he would have said, we're just going to assume it's true after mentioning all the evidence that shows that it's not, I would be like, well, don't we need to talk about that? Like, don't you think maybe you should address why all scientists say that didn't happen unless they're on your payroll?
I was listening to Joel, was it last night or the night before, when he was talking about fossils and everything. He's a devout Christian. He's also a scientist, and he keeps his faith in his own little personal place while not denying science and trying to educate other Christians as well. That I'm a scientist. Here's the science, and I'm also a Christian.
Whenever you're looking at a particular hypothesis, if you apply the scientific method strictly and set aside your biases and beliefs like it's designed to have you do, then you can believe whatever you want on the side. And I don't have an issue with that. In fact, I congratulate you for being able to separate those two things, because, I get it's hard to believe something when here you're looking at evidence exactly to the contrary of what your belief is. But it's your job to do it, and to act like they make it like this conspiracy theory, like scientists are all paid and they're all getting this for telling the secular thing and all this shit. That's the only place they have to go with that, when in fact most scientists that publish in peer-reviewed articles and stuff have integrity and are honest people, but they have to call the science liars in order to say the Bible's true, because both can't happen. So the scientists are now liars, and there are some liars in the scientific community. Don't get me wrong, there are liars, but
sure.
We have consensus. That's why peer review works so well.
The second video I ever did was a talk with Adam, who was in the Holy Land at the university in Israel, where they do what was it, nuclear physics, something like that, some real high tech stuff. It's been a while, but you can go check out the video. And I asked him, I says, everybody, you're in the Holy Land, right? And you're doing all this research in the lab. You spend all day arguing about God. And it's like, no, it doesn't come up. We're doing science.
Right.
So in the Holy Land, where you have very, very, very religious people, and you're surrounded by everything very, very religious, the scientists in the lab are not discussing Noah's Ark or Moses or any of these things. It's just not occurring.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not the same.
So how did the flood happen? In other words, is there a scientific model for the global flood, and where did the water come from?
No. No, there isn't.
No,
and
there's no model. Absolutely not.
Now, he's going to tell us there is, I'm sure.
We're actually going to start with the first C of history, creation. We're going to look at day 3 of creation. We can read, and God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. The fact that the waters were gathered together into one place implies that the land was in one place. If the land was in one place, it implies that before the flood, there was only one continent. And so in this model of catastrophic plate tectonics, the idea is that this one continent before the flood broke up during the flood through catastrophic plate tectonics, which we're going to talk about, and then
at supersonic speeds, all the continents raced around the Earth and
they raced
vaporized
around the
whole
like
planet.
Mario Kart.
And that's why there's no Earth today, and that's why we live on Mars.
Yeah. So this is one of those things that again, like when he first says it, you're like, okay, the planet, everything moved a little faster and got in its place. But let's look at the implications of what that actually would cause. I mean, you're talking about this huge, destructive, catastrophic event that makes all the land masses for some reason move.
And why have a flood?
Yeah.
Why have a flood? God could have just done this catastrophic plate movement and cooked everything. Everything would have been, dead and gone. I mean,
yeah. And that, he has zero evidence that this is the case. There is nothing. There's not even shit for him to post hoc rationalize here. There is nothing that would lead you to the conclusion that happened. Other than I'm reading a book and I need to make it fit in with reality. There is nothing that would make you.
It's a half inch or 3 centimeters a year or something like that. And they want to move that into all the way around the globe in a matter of a year. Wow.
Yeah.
Formed into the continental configuration that we see today. By the way, just a side note here, the idea that the continents had drifted apart was actually first suggested by a creationist in 1859, Antonio Snyder Pellegrini. And so you might wonder, catastrophic plate tectonics, what in the world does that have to do with the flood? Well, because we read that all the fountains of the great deep burst forth. The New King James Version says, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up.
Oh, man. So his evidence supporting the mechanism that he's made up to explain the flood that he made up is to go back and read the Bible again. I mean, how many steps removed do you have to be before you realize that you're on a fishing expedition? Like, because think about this. The flood that he has no evidence for, he can't explain, and there needs to be more water. So what he's came up with is catastrophic plate tectonics, which is a thing not in the Bible, that isn't observed, that there is no evidence for, and that is completely a fabrication out of his own mind, and then uses the Bible to support that that's true. I mean, like, how many steps
I'm confused. Is he saying that the fountains are what push the continents around?
No, he's saying that it
there's no mechanism. He's just saying, well, the fountains of the deep broke open, so that must mean the continents were moving.
Yeah, because they broke open, the continents were moving on them because of the fractures, and so that caused the continents to move to their places because it had all been busted, right? And by the release of God's big release, I guess. But
okay,
yeah, it's
hard to follow what he's trying to say.
Well, okay, let's just go with what the Bible says. The fountains of the deep burst forth, okay? So, and the windows of the heavens were open, whatever that means. But what he's trying to say here is the event that caused the continents to move to where they are is the fountains of the deep bursting open to cause the catastrophic plate tectonics that he needs for his flood to occur.
Okay,
so he's actually 2 steps removed from
the earth got shattered, and then it starts to move all over, and then the cracks are all leaking.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, because it's full of water apparently.
So let's consider the crust of the earth for a moment here. The crust of the earth isn't just one smooth, continuous piece. The crust of the earth is broken up into these plates. And there are different types of plate boundaries. For example, there are convergent boundaries, such as a Pacific plate that's sliding underneath South America. So when you have a convergent boundary, one plate sliding underneath another, there's divergent boundaries, such as in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. You have 2 plates that are moving apart from each other. And then there's transform boundaries, where you have 2 plates that just slide past each other. So creation geologists have developed this model called catastrophic plate tectonics to explain the mechanisms of the flood. And so here's the idea, starting with before the flood. So before the flood, you have the ocean crust, you have the continent, and here's the thing. The ocean crust is made of basaltic rock and is colder and denser than the lithosphere underneath. As for the continental rock,
this isn't a model, it's a fairy tale. There's no reason to suggest that what he's saying is true in any way. He made it up from nothing, just to explain his Bible story. This is not what we observe. This is not actual credible information, so please don't take it as such.
Their average chemical composition is granitic, and they're lighter and denser, so they float on the mantle underneath. Now, there's an inherent instability here. And let me explain what I mean by inherent instability. So let's say you take a basketball and you put it at the bottom of a hill. It's going to be pretty stable. You can maybe kick the basketball a little and it's going to roll back to its spot. But you can also put a basketball at the crest of a hill, and if you set it just right, it's not going to roll anywhere. But if you poke it a little bit, it's going to start rolling down that hill really fast, isn't it? Because there's an inherent instability. It's the same type of thing with the ocean crust.
What does it mean to be, he uses the word inherent instability, but isn't it instability that is caused by you? Like you're the one that disturbs it to push it over the hill in that situation. So it's not inherent. It's
junior high school physics. An object stays at rest unless another force acts upon it.
If you just barely poke it, yeah, okay. But we know because we can study things that the cause of that was you poking it. And we might even be able to determine how hard you poked it, depending on how much data we have and where you poked it at. And that's natural. That's what's important, because when you interacted with the natural world, poking that ball, there was evidence left that you did it. And that's what we're looking for here. And you've concocted more stories instead, sir.
In the continent, because that ocean crust is so heavy and so dense, so denser than the lithosphere underneath, denser than the continent, that pre-flood ocean floor is poised to sink if disturbed. And that would lead to this scenario called runaway subduction. So the boundary between the ocean crust and the continental crust ruptures. So that's the number 3 in the diagram there. And then the ocean crust subducts underneath the continent. And then you'd have a mantle-wide convective flow leading to enormous frictional heat and rifting of ocean floors. So if you see the number 1 in the diagram there, that's...
Okay. Where have we ever observed that this happened at all?
Yeah, I'm thinking you were just saying, if you shoot the ocean underneath the crust, it's going to turn to steam. It's not going to... This is just BS. BS. Totally.
This is completely just made up and said, oh, and this is the way it works. It's a model based on not reality, just his fantasy world.
This is a T-Rock.
Yeah, T-Rock. That's exactly what I thought too. And he just bases this on, because I thought it up and it could work this way and we need this to happen, it must be the case because that's the way it happened. And it's all just back into this special pleading shit where he's just like, I don't know, he sets it up, and then now he'll move on from that and say, well, since that happened, this is what happened. And he builds it on unlikely thing after unlikely thing after unlikely thing without any evidence whatsoever. But then bitches about the way that scientists look at it when they're not looking at it critically at all. They're looking to confirm a story.
It's kind of new to me. I haven't heard that the ocean lifted the land up before.
Now, this is a mechanism you could come up with. I mean, I don't know that it would actually work, but he is coming up with a mechanism to get him there. The problem is that the mechanism that he's came up relies on natural processes. And we don't see any of the shit happening naturally that he's explaining. We don't see any evidence that that's ever happened or would happen, you know? So it's based on nothing. But then he's going to build another block on top of that and say, well, since that's true, that also means that all of the continents sunk and then came back up later. You know, just whatever he wants to say, because he's building it on lie after lie after lie.
And I'm going to show a video here from Genesis Apologetics, a clip of a video that's going to illustrate these processes. And then there's a couple other things to talk about after that.
The newly forming ocean floor offshore is so hot that it starts very thick, pushing up the ocean waters from beneath. Sea level rises dramatically. Molten magma rises and fills the widening gaps, pushing the mid-ocean ridges wider. The hot ocean floor shoves against the continents, then slides beneath it like giant conveyor belts, deep beneath the earth in some places. Rather than the conventional model that has the seafloors spreading slowly, this runaway subduction actually happened quickly, moving at about 5 miles per hour, due to the heat caused by the friction and pressure of the rapidly subducting plates. As the diving ocean plates subduct...
What's that, sir? What's that? There's a heat problem.
What's this guy's name? Reeves. Reeves, that's who he is.
Yeah.
David Reeves.
David Reeves, yeah.
He's terrible.
Yeah. I mean, here it is. Like, okay, all of this rock moving this fast is going to cause a heat problem, but we're gonna say it was going at 2 miles per hour because we might be able to pull that off. And that's what it's like. How can I fit it in and make it work? And it still doesn't work, but it's like the closest they can get. So they're like, well, that's it. And you know, it's crazy. It's crazy talk. This is, to me, this is just as bad as flat Earth, for real.
David Reeves always reminds me of a used car salesman.
Under the land, they push down
phony smile on his face, and he's just special.
Yeah, special guy.
the continental edges and then release them, creating tsunami cycles that blanket the continents, just how tsunamis happen today, only more intense and frequent. For example, the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan, and the fourth largest in history, was a magnitude 9.1 earthquake that occurred in 2011. This earthquake was caused by an undersea megathrust about 45 miles east of the Japanese coast. At the center, there was a
Undersea megathrust is my nickname.
160-foot slip between the overriding plate that was part of Japan and the underlying Pacific plate. The sea bottom rose about 23 feet when the fault unlocked, and the resulting earthquake triggered a devastating tsunami that was 133 feet above sea level and traveled inland for 6 miles. The tsunamis occurring during the flood, however, were different, much different, with the ocean ridge bursting open rapidly and pushing the ocean floor under land continents on a...
Did he just say, this is how tsunamis happen, and here's one we observed and have the data, but we think it's different?
Yeah, this one's totally different, though.
Yeah.
What was the point of that?
Yeah. You see how tsunamis work? We're going to show you how they work, okay? Here's how they work. But now that's not what we think happened at all. Our tsunamis were special.
Yeah, that was a waste of time.
Worldwide scale,
meaningless.
Tsunamis were happening in cycles, several every hour, and with long stretches of subduction zones active at the same time. The incoming phase of a tsunami has a much higher speed and is highly turbulent, which keeps the sediment in suspension, but it leaves behind layers of sediment as it slows down in the retreating phase. This cycle repeats several times every hour during the 150-day inundation stage of the flood, first entombing the shallow marine life, followed by land creatures in different habitats and elevations, leaving behind what we see today in the fossil record.
That
it would make one big conglomerate layer with everything all jumbled in it.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
it would make. I agree there. Yeah, it would. Yeah, everything would churn and get mixed around. And,
Yeah, you're right. That's what would happen.
and it would make one layer. He said it makes a bunch of layers. No.
No, sir.
That would all end up as one geologic layer.
And also, let me point out something else too, because like whenever he even admits it in what he said, that as it goes inland, the heavier stuff drops out first and the lighter stuff drops out later, because that's the hydrologic sorting, right? He mentions that, but what he doesn't account for is whenever we look at the beaches and stuff around, it's the opposite. We don't see the bigger rocks going into the ocean and the sand inland, because that's just the opposite of what we see, even in his example that he uses to say it's science somehow. So it doesn't match the actual geology of the earth in any way or reality. But again, it's a made-up mechanism,
And David Reeves Ministries, I think is what it's called, is terrible. It's one of the worst creationist sites there are, and that's where why he's pulling information from that, I don't know. AIG has got to have a warehouse full of old videos.
They get a thumbs down from Bigfoot today. Bigfoot gives them a thumbs down.
Thumbs down.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, and we know that because it was written.
These types of tsunamis have even occurred in recent history, such as the tsunami caused by slipping ocean plates that hit the coast of Washington in 1700 and left behind multiple layers representing each wave of the tsunami. Recent seismic technology actually allows us to investigate.
Yeah.
That's
You go
one
first.
layer. That's one layer. It's not multiple layers. It's one layer. It doesn't matter if a bunch of stuff is all piled up in that. That's going to become one layer when it gets all squished down eventually.
Well,
It's the same argument they use at Mount St. Helens, that you can see all these different layers in the flows after the pyroclastic flow. And what you're seeing is, all the different materials. And like you said, some of the heavier ones and lighter ones kind of push different down the hill and everything. And it's, you see a little different change in color with the different materials. However, once again, this is one event. It will become one layer. Even though it looks like it's got different bands in it or whatever. It's going to be one layer.
I think it's actually worse than that in this case, because what he just did was he showed that rock wall and showed what it looked like from tsunamis or from waves coming up and leaving it that way. But here's the problem. There it is. He's observing what it looks like when tsunamis do that. Is that what the geologic column looks like? It's not. It's just simply not. You've actually shown why that's not the case, because that doesn't match anything we see anywhere in the geologic column.
Good catch, Joe. Good catch.
Yeah.
Whether this type of rapid subduction occurred. Sure enough, these scans reveal a ring of unexpectedly cold rock at the bottom of the mantle, beneath the subduction zones that surround the Pacific Ocean.
Isn't that interesting? There's actually circumstantial evidence within the Earth that is consistent with this model. Now, I want to talk about a couple other things that the video didn't cover.
No, that's not true.
You made up a bunch of stuff, and your model is maybe your model, but again, creationists cannot get together with a model.
Well, what they did here, he says there, it matches circumstantial evidence, but that's not. How did you get that match? Because the problem is that you formed your hypothesis around making it match what we actually see, rather than using what we actually see to explain the origins of those rocks.
And he's using uniformitarianism. It's all right.
Because as magma escapes through the ocean floor rift zone, so look at the number 1 on the diagram there, it mixes with the water on a massive scale, causing violent supersonic steam jets to pour into the atmosphere. And all that water vapor would fall back down as intense global rain.
Supersonic steam vapor into the atmosphere. He makes it sound good, doesn't he? Like, what does that mean? Like, lava coming up with the ocean would cause a lot of steam, which would go into the atmosphere and cause rain. But water that's already there, turn it into rain, doesn't equal more water.
You need a serious laboratory experiment to get steam at a supersonic flow.
Yeah.
It has to have one of them high pressure nozzles and everything.
Word salad.
Yeah, I'm looking it up here online, and
yeah, but
I'm going to call BS. That can't happen naturally. You have to have equipment to achieve supersonic steam.
But it's again, it's worse than that, because what he's arguing here is that this lava comes up and causes steam to rise into the atmosphere, which causes the raining. But it's not giving additional water. It's the water that's already there turned into steam and then back into water. It's not, you're not adding water. It doesn't help you explain all the water in any way whatsoever.
And you're just adding more heat to the problem.
Yeah. You're just so far now they've got 3 different ways that lava is coming into the ocean in different ways to explain what they need to explain. It's beyond absurd what he's saying here. And again, we don't observe anything like what he's talking about.
Yeah, that's what he was trying to use these cold spots that are there, but you can't have your cold spots when you're trashing the planet with this stuff.
Right.
So
right.
He's trying to have it both ways. Yeah.
Yeah, they're just whatever to try and explain it. It doesn't matter what I have to say as long as.
So think of the onset of the flood, the 40 days and 40 nights of intense rain. That might be what would have caused that. And then magma upwelled from the mantle will replace the old ocean floor with new ocean floor, while the ocean crust expands due to heat, causing the sea level to rise by about 3,500 feet. So that's the number 2 in the diagram. See where it says ocean.
So he can't explain more water, so he's trying to make more land.
Now, these are the climate change deniers.
Yeah.
But he's saying that if you warm the oceans, they can rise by 3,500 feet. But yet they laugh about climate change raising sea levels.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's a weird thing for him to say, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right out of a climate change
So think
model.
about this. A video talked about the tsunami cycles. Surely that would be happening. But the ocean crust is also expanding, raising the sea level even without the tsunamis. But imagine those two things working together, that's going to flood the continent.
He said it. He said, I imagine that's the word.
That's going to flood the whole earth. This was not a tranquil flood by any means. Imagine how utterly catastrophic.
I like a tranquil flood, don't you? Don't you like a tranquil flood?
Yeah,
what the hell's a tranquil flood?
Yeah. And look at these pictures. I mean, think about this is straight up propaganda is what this is. These pictures to make this awful, scary, like hundreds of foot tall wave flood. And again, he's imagined all of the mechanisms and everything for this to be the case. And yet now we have artistic renderings of what it would look like. I mean, could you talk out your ass a little more? Could you just straight up make shit up more than you are already?
And so after the flood, new oceanic crust cools and contracts. Now the ocean crust is one continuous piece from under the ocean to under the continent, which is much more stable than before, consistent with God's promise to not flood the entire earth again. Think Genesis.
So now he's predicting the future based on the ocean floor. Before the ocean floor was soft and fell apart and it sunk and allowed all the magma to come up, which superheated everything, right? And we don't explain how anything lived through that, and riding the waves of lava around with the supersonic steam jets everywhere. I mean, you got to watch out for those.
Gopherwood's fireproof.
Yeah.
And when I covered that one pastor, he said, where's my note here? He said when the fountains of the deep broke open, it released the energy of 1 trillion billion atomic bombs.
Oh.
So Gopherwood is some tough stuff.
Tough shit. Yeah. Stuff. He probably had Ken Ham says he had an iron shop and stuff. So he probably had some Gorilla Tape too. I bet that's how he did it. And also, like, these artist renderings that he showed, like, how we're supposed to believe that Noah's boat, that was nowhere near as big as that damn wave you just seen, somehow got hit by this wave and it was just all good. They all lived. All the animals were fine. Like, the most violent thing ever in a boat made of gopher wood. Again, his nails must have been pretty special, too, for that thing not to come apart.
Well, you know how water jets can cut steel, right?
Yeah, not gopher wood.
So if he's got a supersonic fountain squirting up with, it should have just sliced right through that arc. So It's water jet proof, it's atomic bomb proof, it's fireproof, it's tsunami wave proof.
Yeah.
In layers that are above their fossilized footprints, which could be indicative of those animals trying to get away from the floodwaters. They leave their footprints behind, but then get buried later on.
You can't leave footprints in a flood. You can't leave footprints in a flood.
Yeah. How are they performing this magical feat? Yeah. I mean, unless he wants to broaden that even further and then say there were footprints and then animals were buried at some other point, but they can't be at the same time.
The earth is trashed, the soil and everything is all ripped up and churning, but yet you can leave nice little tracks in the
little footprints in the rocks.
No, you already said that's impossible by the way you said everything's going on. You can't leave tracks. No way.
The supersonic steam jets protected it, Dave.
And the gopherwood.
The gopherwood. They had
gopherwood shoes. That's what it was. They had gopherwood shoes.
Yeah. It was the gopherwood. You're right.
Whole separate presentations on dinosaurs, but I want to talk just briefly about dinosaurs here. Evolutionists are often under the impression that we don't find modern-day mammals and other creatures buried with dinosaurs. Actually, we do. Find nautilus, beetles, crayfish, lobsters, beavers, squirrels, flamingos, hedgehogs, cormorants, sharks, dragonflies, parrots, rabbits, horseshoe crabs, sandpipers, grasshoppers, crickets, all buried with dinosaurs.
Yes.
And then
Those
there's a
are
Morrison
ancestors.
Formation
Those
out
are
west.
not the modern versions. He said those are the modern versions found with the dinosaurs. No, those are not the versions alive today that are found with the dinosaurs. No.
And also, you know, me and you just covered a video where we explained, like with the horseshoe crab, how sometimes when things are successful, they keep that form. They have no environmental pressure to change, so they stay the same. And what does this prove to him? That even if that's the case, even if they were exactly the same, that doesn't prove anything other than that they have a very successful form that's carried on millions of years, the same as the horseshoe crab. But again,
I know. I covered the beaver before. The beavers used to be a lot bigger, so the beavers are.
We are years later, and he's still making the same argument. That has been completely debunked.
I've got Mary Schweitzer's quote right here. This is from a BioLogos interview, July 21, 2014, called Not So Dry Bones, an interview with Mary Schweitzer by Emily Ruppel, Ruppel. Mary says, and I quote, "One thing that does bother me, though, is that young Earth creationists take my research and use it for their own message, and I think they are misleading people about it. Pastors and evangelists who are in a position of leadership are doubly responsible for checking facts and getting things right, but they have misquoted me and misrepresented the data." Mary Schweitzer.
And when was that?
This was a BioLogos interview in 2014.
So, 10 years
10 years ago, and he hasn't caught up.
Yeah.
That's lazy. Sir, you are not only dishonest, you are lazy. This has been, and this isn't the only time. I have a video, I don't remember what video it is right now, but in one of my videos, go watch them all. In one of them, I have Mary Schweitzer answering Paul Enns from Apologia, and Paul asks her directly, "Did you find these things?" And Mary says, "No."
Yeah. And 10 years later, and he made it a point to say that it wasn't fossilized tissue, and it absolutely was. And I feel like that, again, this is something that he could have got wrong, but given the other things that he's said, it seems to me like he's just not being truthful.
This has been out for a long time. And when the first disinformation first came out, Mary was quick to respond, and she was on, she was on with Paula Gia, I think more than once. She was on some other shows. She was on different interviews. She gave this interview to BioLogos, and I think there were some others online too. She was out on top of it saying, "No, that's wrong. That's not what I said. That's not what my research found." But sadly, with many of these things, the headlines and the clickbait everybody sees, nobody ever goes to look what Mary Schweitzer actually said. But I did, and I've got her quote, and I've got her video. So
we'll good job, Dave. Good job, because that's exactly, anytime a creationist gives you a source that you can check, go check it, because it almost never agrees with the what they're saying. I've never had an occurrence where it did. Anytime a young Earth creationist has given me a scientific source to support their narrative, I've went and looked, and it either doesn't exist, or doesn't at all say what they say it says, or it's something that completely debunks their whole position, and they've just used one sentence out of it to try and support themselves.
I'm not shy to admit that I do it, because Joe and I, we're lay people. Okay, we know what we know from looking around and learning things and stuff, but a lot of these things we're lay people on. Okay, so what I do is, like, if he says a term I don't know, or some kind of data, and I'm like, really? And I did it a couple times while we were recording this. I punched it up on Google. It only takes a couple seconds.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it?
and it's like, and
amazing.
Yeah, just don't look at the one source. Look at what the other different sources are saying, right?
And it
when
gives
it comes
these little
up,
things that tells who it's from, and you can cite your sources. Yeah.
And when it's coming up with things that, like Mary Schweitzer saying, no, you're fibbing and you're misquoting me and you're misrepresenting the data, that's from Mary herself. This isn't somebody said, or my cousin's brother told me. No. Yeah, you can go right back to Mary Schweitzer and see what Mary herself says. And in case you didn't notice, Mary is a Christian, and she's very disappointed in her Christian peers.
Yeah. Well, I think that's about all we're going to have time to look at today from this fellow. He has misrepresented science, lied about things over and over, and just plainly made stuff up to support his position. Dave, you got any final thoughts on this wonderful presentation we observed?
Well, number one, I don't think he's ever had a debate with anybody. I think you're fibbing, Kevin, and I'm calling you out on it. And if this ever gets back to you, I would like to see where you ever actually had a debate with somebody that actually knew any science. I think that was the debate me, bro. Yeah, I think you've been in a few comment sections, and that's about it. And otherwise, your stage presence is awful. Joe and I know doing these, doing YouTube. I mean, at least smile or something, dude. I mean, show some personalities, something. I mean, you're dead wood, okay?
He's boring as hell to listen to.
He repeated a lot of Ken Ham, which he has to do under contract because that's what he's paid to do. He repeated a lot of Ken Ham word for word, and he gave a lot of bad information. Again, with Mary Schweitzer, 10 years ago, she said, no, that's not what I said. And if you don't have the time to look up what Mary Schweitzer said over the past 10 years, you need to slow down, my dude.
Maybe don't quote her then.
You're running a little too much on the Mountain Dew and the caffeine if you haven't checked what Mary has said in the last 10 years. So I'll agree with Mary Schweitzer, and shame on you. Yeah, if you want to hear more about what I have to say about things, you can check me out at the Captive Desk. That's Captive Desk, 2 words. And I also do the Grassman Chronicles, and we cover primarily Bigfoots over there. And I try to have a little fun on my channel, give opinions, and I cover a lot of these type of topics. And one thing Joe and I have a kindred spirit about is staying on Ken Ham, because he has a lot of money. He does a lot of homeschooling materials. And this is the stuff from Mr. Personality here that's being taught to children. And Joe and I think this shouldn't be taught to anybody, much less children.
Yeah, I agree completely. Even if you have different beliefs about where everything in the world came from, you should want your kids to learn the best information from the best sources. And this is not that. This is made up fairy tales to fit a fantasy story that they some reason think is true, even though it's not supported by anything. I want to thank everybody for coming and watching. And like I said, the best thing you can do to help the channel is click the like and subscribe button. If you want to become a member, we have membership starting it out at 99 cents, and I do members content every week. And unedited versions of all these recorded videos go up on my Patreon, and that's the only place you can see those. So a little bit of something for everybody that supports the channel. Thank you so much for coming and watching, and try to use your brains and not listen to assholes like this. Later, guys.